Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. I was doing a bit of light reading the other day and looking through a working paper titled Bioterrorism and Biocrimes, the illicit use of biological agents since the 1900s. Of all the cases mentioned in the book, the ones that interested me the most were crimes committed by medical professionals or students that had access to weird diseases and parasites. Thankfully, these sorts of cases are quite rare, but it's still disturbing to read about what certain deranged individuals are capable of when they have access to dangerous biological material. So let's look at two different cases that show why it might not be a good idea to piss these kinds of people off. I'll start with a man named Eric Krans. In 1970, 23-year-old Eric Krans was a postdoctoral student at MacLeod College in Quebec. His area of research was parasitology. He shared a house with 5 other students, but he was having trouble paying his share of the rent. As a result, his housemates told him that he had to leave. Reading between the lines on some of these articles, it does sound like they had other problems with Eric Krans too. He did eventually pay his rent, but they still told him that he had to move out. To me, it sounds like he was just a problem housemate. Upon being told that he had to get out, Krans became extremely angry and made a number of threats to his housemates. He threatened to damage their cars, burn down the house, and that he would infect them with parasitic worms. Despite these threats, a few days later Eric Krans prepared a special meal to celebrate Winter Festival, and his housemates happily tucked in. An incident on the 4th of February, a few days after the meal, gives us an idea of some of the tensions inside the house. With Krans refusing to move out, his housemates cut off the heating in his room. In order to get some heat into his room, Eric Krans smashed the windows in his door. Because of this damage, the police were called and he was put into a cell overnight. About a week after the special Winter Festival meal, 4 of Eric Krans' housemates began to get sick. At first they just had a bit of a cough, but it quickly developed into a fever, loss of appetite and shortness of breath. On the 12th of February, all 4 housemates that were sick went to the emergency room. The case report describes 3 of them as being cyanotic, meaning that their skin was turning blue from lack of oxygen. 2 of them were suffering from acute respiratory failure. They quickly fell into a critical condition. They were diagnosed with pneumonia and they were given antibiotics, but they didn't respond to the medicine and their condition continued to get worse. After 4 days in hospital, medical staff were able to identify the cause. Ascaris suum, a type of roundworm that, until now, was only thought to infect pigs. Doctors found thousands of these worms infesting the lungs of the 4 patients. At some point, around 2 weeks earlier, the 4 men had swallowed a large quantity of roundworm eggs. These eggs had hatched in their intestines and travelled up into their lungs. Once the cause of their illness was confirmed, they were successfully treated with a drug called piperazine. All 4 men made a full recovery, but it was touch and go for 2 of them. There was a 5th housemate that never got sick. None of the articles I've read seem to mention why. Maybe he didn't eat any of the food that Krans made. Eric Krans was arrested for the poisoning. All 5 of his housemates were able to testify that they'd heard Krans threatening to infest them with parasitic worms, and Krans in court admitted that he had indeed made that threat. It was also proved that he was working in a laboratory with the exact same roundworms that had infested his housemates. The time frame between him preparing the meal and his housemates developing symptoms also matched the life cycle of the worms. Add this to the fact that this was the first time in recorded history that any humans had been infected with that particular type of roundworm, and that it was estimated that they would have to have eaten between 300 and 400,000 roundworm eggs to get that kind of infestation. Despite all of this evidence, Eric Krans was eventually acquitted. It was successfully argued that because the sink in the kitchen of the house kept backing up with sewage water, that they could have become infested from ingesting contaminated water. Also, because Krans worked in a lab with the worms, it was possible that he could have carried the parasites home on his clothes and accidentally caused the infestation. There wasn't enough evidence to prove that Krans was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and so he walked free. On October 29th, 1996, lab workers at the St. Paul Medical Center Hospital in Dallas received an email inviting them to enjoy some muffins and donuts that had been left in the lab's cafeteria. 12 workers helped themselves to donuts and muffins. One person even took some home and shared them with a family member. Within a few hours, everyone who had ate one of the snacks fell ill. They had severe bloody diarrhea, fever, and extreme stomach cramps. 9 people had to go to the emergency room for treatment, and 4 of them were hospitalized. Luckily, none of them died. Suspecting these mysterious lunchroom treats might be the source of the outbreak, one of the muffins was taken for tests. It was found to contain high amounts of Shigella dysentery, a bacteria which causes dysentery. Further investigations found that a vial in the lab which contained beads contaminated with Shigella dysentery had been tampered with, and some of those beads were missing. Suspicion fell on a lab worker named Dianna Thompson. She was one of the few people that had access to the bacterial cultures which were safely locked away. Co-workers reported that Thompson had repeatedly reminded them about the donuts and muffins and had come into the break room to watch people eat them, although she didn't have one herself. They didn't think much of it at the time, but in retrospect it seemed rather suspicious. Police got involved, and whilst they were looking for further evidence, they probed into her past and uncovered some extremely disturbing details. A year earlier, Diane's boyfriend at the time, John Ritchie, had fallen ill with very similar symptoms. Sometime in September 1995, John Ritchie had decided that he wanted to end his relationship with Dianna Thompson, but for some reason they continued dating for another month. Then John Ritchie started to become ill. At first he just had a sore throat, but this soon developed into diarrhea and fever. On October the 20th, he went to the emergency room at St. Paul Medical Center complaining of chest pains. 6 days later, he was hospitalized suffering from severe dehydration. As you've probably guessed, John Ritchie had been deliberately poisoned with the same Shigella dysentery bacteria. Although, whilst he was in hospital, doctors found it very difficult to correctly diagnose the infection. This is because Dianna Thompson had access to the lab where John Ritchie's stool samples were kept. She was swapping his stools with samples from other patients so that the doctors couldn't detect the Shigella infection. As he lay in hospital, John Ritchie grew suspicious of Thompson. She had started acting very strange. She brought him a glass of water and got extremely angry when he wouldn't drink it. Later on, she brought him a bottle of Gatorade. Again, he refused to drink it because it looked like she had already opened the bottle. A few days after getting out of hospital, I'm guessing that Dianna Thompson and John Ritchie had somewhat made up, and he was starting to trust her again because she sent him off to work with a lasagna that she'd made specially for him, and he did eat it. Not surprisingly, a few hours after eating the lasagna, he fell sick again. He had diarrhea and fever. He was given some antibiotics and told to rest up at home. The following day, Dianna Thompson convinced John Ritchie to let her extract some of his blood and take it to the lab for investigation. I can't really fathom why he would let her do this. He'd already suspected her of trying to poison him, and then he'd fallen ill a second time after eating food that she made for him. Now he's letting her stick a needle in his arm. I don't really get it. An hour after taking his blood, John Ritchie's arm started to get sore. Later that evening, Dianna Thompson's hospital supervisor called Ritchie up and told him that his blood was filled with bacteria and that he had to get to the emergency room. John Ritchie was successfully treated and he made a full recovery, but he grew extremely scared of Dianna Thompson. Over the following few weeks, his car tyres were slashed multiple times and sugar was poured into his gas tank. Eventually he had to move away from town just to get away from her. Now, I'm not sure why at this point she wasn't reported to the police and something was done about it. It wasn't until a year later, when she poisoned her workmates, that she was eventually investigated. Her motives against her boyfriend were quite clear. She wanted to get revenge because he was going to finish with her. But in court, she wasn't able to say why she decided to poison her co-workers. Some of them hardly knew her at all, so it wasn't done for personal revenge. Perhaps she's just the kind of person who got a sick pleasure from making people sick. Scary to think that she worked in a hospital. Eventually, Thompson was charged with tampering with food to deliberately poison her 12 co-workers, plus for the harassment, poisoning and stalking of John Ritchie. She was also charged with falsifying lab documents to cover her tracks. She was given a 20-year prison sentence, which means she's probably out by now. I wonder what she's doing now. Hopefully nothing that involves working with dangerous diseases or food. There were a couple of other cases in the Biocrimes book that I wanted to cover, but it would have made this video way too long. But if you think these stories were bad, then there's a couple more that really showcase the very worst of humanity, so I'll probably return to it in the future. I hope you found these stories interesting. Thanks to everyone on Patreon who is supporting the channel. I'm going to pick 3 more random patrons to win a prize. Same as last time, it's nothing major, just a bit of fun, some stickers, a keyring, and I'll throw in a little drawing by me. Welcome back to the amazing giveaway draw. Please try to contain your excitement. I've got everyone's names in this very glamorous random name picking device. These people with a P next to their name are people who have donated on PayPal, just so I remember. Let's pick some random names, 3 people. Who's it going to be? Vicky Tung. Very good, very good. I'm sure you are thrilled with this news. Chris Bruzen, congratulations to you. Okay, final name. Alright, nice one, Wade. Congratulations to these 3 people. Please check your inbox on Patreon because I will message you on there. If you want a chance to be entered into the draw, then just sign up on Patreon. It's very exciting, or you can donate on PayPal. Anyone who donates on PayPal gets entered for a month, same as Patreon really. Alright, thanks for watching everybody, and I'll see you on the next video. Until next time, goodbye.